Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to start a new week since it is Monday. This new theme that we're checking out this week is actually going to continue on into next week because we need to look at 10 songs. 5 bands, 2 songs for each. The theme is Wild Shifts. We're going to look at a song that is fairly indicative of what a band does or an artist, something that's very typical for them, and then something wildly out of character. I think this is going to be fascinating to see how bands extrapolate and work outside the bounds of their normal constraints while still probably bringing a little bit of their typical flair to this new style that they're working with. And to start off, we're going to be looking at Deafheaven. We have had them on the channel before. This will be a nice quick refresher on what type of music they create. We're going to be looking at Brought to the Water. Let's dive in. I think this is the album opener on the album as well, which is where this intro I think works. This really big wall of sound right here. Drums are just going wild while the guitar sits so far on the outside here with these chords. Yeah, the cymbal work's interesting. So this bar, the cymbals are consistent, and then this bar, they're syncopated. Very cool. really interesting hearing all this melody in here. I haven't quite figured out where this lands on the post/blackened realm. Maybe it's both, but neither of them are usually really strong with guitar melody. Like even this section right here feels a bit out of place to me. This feels closer to what I would expect from this style. Very interesting adapting that last chord progression. See, this feels a lot more blackened since we're working with riffs on the guitars. Wow. Kind of like, wow. It's very pop punk here based on the note selection. Complete with a fade out on this. Yeah. The vocals and the production give it a completely different feel, but musically, a double fade out? What in the world? Oh man. I think endings are the biggest grab bag when it comes to this channel. There's some endings that are just phenomenal. And then there's others that just confound me. And this is one of those. We had a fade out. And then we faded another instrument in that had a loosely adjacent idea. I think the rhythmic phrasing was off, but the harmonic phrasing, the chord progression, and the way that choosing specific notes out of the chord to emphasize was fairly similar. And then we just faded that back out again, while also introducing dissonance at the back half of it. by changing up some of the notes in the middle of the chord to more tenser relationships. Wild. I can't say I understand it. As usual, maybe lyrics or interviews would help with that, but just purely on the musical level, first listen, huh? That's about all I got for that ending. Now, musically, I really want to focus on a couple of things because I think it's what they do best. This is at its heart post something, post rock, maybe post metal, blackened something else. I don't know. It's very posty and blackenedy, and I think that's really the best description I have for it. And through that, we hear a lot of repetition. We hear a lot of texture. Texture work is all over the place. Sometimes we have just chords going on, but the textures are what's driving the atmosphere. Um, Not a whole lot of bass in here from what I could hear. The guitars took up so much space. The drums were huge, and then we also had that sort of nasally, smaller but piercing vocal style that I associate with black metal. Uh, it's a harsh. I don't think I need to say that, but just in case, there's a lot of blackened and or post style of textures going on in here. But it's not the only thing we hear, and I think this is what I want to take up a majority of the analysis section on is their exploration of variety and kind of showcasing that they're more than just another texture band. And I think that's the really cool thing that stands out to me here, and it's vaguely what I remember about Deafheaven in previous tracks. Probably end up re-listening, if nothing else than just a snippets of the last two Deafheaven. I think we've done at least two Deafheaven reactions in preparation for tomorrow when we explore something that is a bit on the other side of their style, which is going to be Lament for Wasps. Regardless, they have a lot of iterative stuff here as a foundation, but they use it as a jumping off point to create contrast within their works. And one of the ways is through the way that the guitars are written for. There are plenty of sections in here that are just 16th note picked or tremolo picked, even in one instance, from what I could hear, of uh, slower moving melodies. Lots of whole notes and half notes, sometimes using dotted half notes and a quarter as a way to play maybe a root tone and then a transition note into the next root tone. That was something we heard a lot of here. But there's just a general concept of holding out a note for a really long time, but just continuing to pick it many times to give it the concept of speed despite the stagnation of the pitch, which doesn't change. Pretty typical for both post and blackened metals. But we don't just hear it with that hyper compressed white noise textured guitar tone. We also hear it with just a clean guitar. I'm not sure if it was a clean electric. Maybe it was I think one of them was an acoustic when we hit that midpoint with about it was about like 3.5 minutes to go, and we had just the two guitars going. I don't think the drums were here. I don't think the vocals were here. Don't remember hearing a bass. And our right panned one, I think, might have been an acoustic, whereas our left panned one was a clean electric. Could be wrong about that. But the idea here is that we've changed up the timbre of these instruments from something that is more staticky and distorted, something more fitting for those styles of metal, and something that is kind of just poppy in a sense. I don't want to say poppy, but just cleaner. It evokes the sound of more mainstream music, whereas that wall of compression doesn't. And so that's one of the ways that the guitars utilize this diversity in textures to create a contrast. But we also have a diversity in how they play. Through the first half of the track, it is primarily just chords, whole notes, and even tied whole notes for if we're playing the same chord across two bars. And it's to create this atmosphere. And I think at one time we actually had a series where each chord or possibly note was held for two bars, and then two bars, and then two bars, and then two bars. And it really allowed you to sit and dwell within the sound before we moved on to the next. At the halfway point, though, we began to introduce something a little bit more melodic in those clean guitars, and when we come back into the heavier distorted section, we have moved from simple chord progressions to riffs. There is movement within the guitar work. It is semi-melodic rather than being completely foundational. And so we have a variety of guitar styles in here where we hear foundational work, we hear something that could be a mix of foundation and melody, and we hear something a bit more melodic. We also have that completely melodic guitar line at like 3.5 minutes into the track that was very outside the norm for the black metal style that we had sort of been exploring up to that point. So there's just a lot of ways that the guitars play around with the way they sound and what they're playing to create diversity throughout the track. It is 8.5 minutes long, and it does not really feel that way. Now, the vocals don't really change much at all. They're fairly static, not only just in the fact that there is one note that they really aim for with their harsh, and it's just that sound, but also that they only do the harsh. The drums, however, are exceptionally, what's the word I want? Contrasty, dynamic, in that there's quite a few different styles. At the beginning, we hear something more adjacent to blackened drumming with just constant bass kicks and blast beats on the snare. We eventually get to a point with some really interesting ride work, um, and I'm just a huge fan of that. I'm not a big fan of blast beats and 16th note bass kicks for a very long time, but I think when you put some really dancey, syncopated cymbal work, especially as you start playing around with the bell and rounder cymbal tones, that there's just something really beautiful about that disconnect, about the raw weight and power and brutality of that oppressive snare and bass kick with this light, dancey, dexterous cymbal work, and it works for me every single time. Um, but yeah, so we get some of this like straight up black metal stuff, but even towards the middle and then closer to the end, the drums kind of lighten up a little bit, and they have more of a punky rhythm that they kind of lean into. They still stick with faster rhythms. Um, if punk would do eighth notes than they would do 16th notes, that kind of thing. So they're always playing faster, but the general groove that sits underneath is uh is punkier. And that's another thing too, is that black metal typically doesn't have groove. There is no change in accent on the snare. There's no different accents on the bass kicks. It's just a rigid, continuous wall of sound coming out of the drums. And we do enter some groovier ideas in the back half of this track. And then there's just the general fills of the drums. Most drummers will typically put a drum fill at the end of a section, which could be in an 8 or 16 bar phrase if we're looking at more traditional musical phrasings. This drummer puts a fill every 2 bars, whether we're changing ideas or not. They are all over the place. The drummer just goes crazy at times. And it is a joy to listen to. If the atmosphere is not doing it for you, if the rigidity of the rhythms aren't doing it for you, you can tune into the drums. And while they're going to be kind of drony for 75% of it, every 5 seconds you're going to get a wild fill to listen to. So there's always something to listen to, something to look forward to, if most of the music isn't quite working for you. And so through all of these, we get a real strong sense of diversity throughout the track, which is one of my biggest complaints about black metal in general is sort of just the rigidity of it. Even though there are sections where I can break things up and hear changes, they're all exceptionally similar. They use the same foundation, the same building blocks, the same blueprint to build their different sections on. And Deafheaven, at least in this track, choose to use different foundations through all their sections. We have the posty beginning. We have the, I don't even know what we would call it. What music is there with strong guitar melody? Not like a solo, just like a lead melody that happens to be played on a guitar over post-metal fuzziness. Like, I don't even have a name for that. We have the chiller midsection that leads us into a more black metal style aggressive section where we have the riffs in the guitars rather than the pure chords. And then we have like this pop punk ending. Like, where does that? I forgot to even bring that up, but that brings its own harmonic ideas with it, its own chord progressions, its own way of crafting phrases. We get 7 bars of this really rigid stuff, and then we get a bar at the end of each of these 8-bar phrases of this very pop punk, sort of post hardcore way of tying up the end of a phrase. I don't remember what it was. Everybody kind of came in on this rhythmic concept. And then we went back to like this tremolo picking and the 16th note bass kicks and stuff like that. Um, So, I mean, this whole section has its own identity too, and then the ending borrows that but puts it on piano, which kind of lightens it up a little bit, but then we inject dissonance in there, which isn't really something we've heard too much of throughout this track. Despite the harshness of texture and tone, the harmonic quality has been consonant throughout. Everything has been designed to be harmonious rather than to create conflict. Um, So there's just always something changing around the corner with this track, and that's what has it standing out to me beyond other posty blackened bands. It is a track that might not work for me at every moment, but has something new around every corner as well. Overall, I still think it's not my cup of tea, but as a first time listen, I found it very, well, engaging, I'd say. Primarily because there's always something to listen to, but the time flew, which isn't always something that happens with black metal. At 8.5 minutes, I was kind of a little worried about it, but honestly, it felt like no time at all. And I think that highlights everything I wanted to talk about. So let's hit some lyrics. There's none here. Well, metaphorically none. There's a whole 7 lines. Where has my passion gone? Has it been carried off by some lonely driver in a line of fluorescent light? Has it been blurred together in ribbon patterns on the night? Along the stretch of some unnamed plain, we begin anew. I saw in your face that we're the same when we began anew. A multiverse of fuchsias and violets surrenders to blackness now. My world closes its eyes to sex and laughter. I really don't have much of an understanding here, which doesn't help the my understanding of the song or even the ending of the track. There's definitely elements of loss here and confusion. Where has my passion gone? He almost feels like the passion was stolen. He says, has it been carried off by some driver? I don't know what ribboned patterns on the night are, though. But then, despite this, he finds somebody. He says, in some unnamed plane, we begin again. I look in your face and see we're the same. This could be a lot of things, because this could be everything from a reflection of the self to coming terms with the duality within to, finding somebody just like you who makes life so easy. And you just really enjoy being around them, and they bring passion back to you. They're your muse in a sense. There's a lot of ways to read that. But then he says a multiverse of fuchsia and violet surrender to blackness. So any joy, that beginning again, whatever that means, it's repeated twice. So it seems pretty important. But whatever that beginning again with this person, whether it is a reflection of the self or someone else, that any brightness and color from that relationship turns to blackness again, and the world closes its eyes, or sorry, my world closes its eyes to laughter. So whatever positivity they found was snuffed out again, just like the loss of their passion at the beginning. I, I mean, that's a surface read of it. Uh, I'm kind of hoping there's something else here because I don't see any of this rising and falling. That's what it is, right? We start from nothing, wondering where things have gone. We find passion again, and then we lose it immediately. I don't see any of this in the music. In fact, it seems the opposite, where the music is on a really high note, and then we dip down into just the clean guitar work, and then we rise back up into the black metal outro. And then, like, so where does the piano come in? Why do we get this double fade out? Um, yeah, I don't know. I suppose that's where y'all come in. Those are my thoughts on Deafheaven's Brought to the Water. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of this track, if there's anything that stood out to you, or your own perspective on things. Maybe you have some corrections to what I said. Above the comment section in the description box, you can find a link to Linktree in there. It takes you to this menu here. You can find my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three. We do have a special selection coming up next. Otherwise, we'll be back tomorrow to check out that other Deafheaven track and see what they do when they're working in a style that's completely different from their norm. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.